Why was the valley so quiet before the storm? That was the thought that lingered in Foster's mind as she pressed her cheek against the cold limestone, her finger resting near the trigger of her rifle. She had seen quiet before in dozens of deployments, in hostile valleys that pretended to be empty. But this silence carried weight. It wasn't absence. It was waiting. Then the world erupted. The first burst of machine gun fire shattered the stillness, a staccato roar that echoed through the jagged canyon. Bullets hissed past her head, shredding rock and dirt in sharp sprays. Radio chatter exploded in her earpiece, urgent, fractured voices. Contact front. Multiple tangos left. We're surrounded. Pulse surged, but her breath stayed steady. Training had built that into her bones. She sighted through her scope, finding the flash of muzzle fire along the northern cliff face. One squeeze, one recoil, and the figure slumped from his perch. She didn't wait to admire the shot. More were climbing into position. Too many. "This is SEAL Team Charlie," the voice of Lieutenant Commander Blake cut through the chaos. "We're pinned down, taking heavy fire from all sides, requesting immediate backup." Waited, her stomach tightening for the reply. It came a moment later, cold and final. "Negative, Charlie. No assets available. You're on your own." On your own. The words sank like lead. She shifted behind her jagged cover, scanning the ridges above. There were dozens of them. Well-trained, disciplined, not the kind of scattered militia she dealt with in desert towns or remote villages. This was different. Coordinated fire, perfect ambush positions. Whoever had set this trap had studied every fold of the terrain. "I count at least 50 hostiles," reported, her voice rough. Her teeth gritted as another volley of rounds chipped stone inches from her helmet. "They've got us boxed in." A pause on the net, Blake's voice low and tense. "Copy that." Wasn't afraid of dying. She had accepted that risk long before she joined special operations as a designated marksman. What rattled her now wasn't death. It was the thought of being erased, of never being found. This valley didn't exist on maps. No reinforcements. No witnesses, just a quiet hollow where 12 Americans might vanish into the earth without a sound. She fought to push back the thought, focus, one shot at a time. Bullets whipped across the ravine, an unrelenting rain of fire. To her right, Petty Officer Harrison screamed into his mic. "Heavy machine guns east. They're trying to pin us for slaughter." Adjusted her rifle, sighting in. The machine gun crew on there was tearing the canyon apart, their tracers drawing orange lines through the air. She found the gunner, exhaled, and fired. The shot struck true, but another fighter slid into position, keeping the weapon alive. The enemy wasn't breaking rhythm. They moved like soldiers, not rebels. Every time one fell, another replaced him. Every shot they fired forced the SEALs further into cover, shrinking their options by the second. "Command, this is Charlie Actual," Blake called again. His voice was raw now, threaded with a sharp edge. "We are surrounded, outnumbered, low on ammo. How copy?" The pause stretched forever, closed her eyes for just a breath, listening to the screams of ricochets above her. When command finally responded, the words were a death sentence. "Army aviation is 70 minutes out. Can you hold position?" 70 minutes. His hand tightened around her rifle. At their current rate, they'd be out of ammunition in 15. Her mind flicked, unbidden, to her younger brother back home in Montana, who had begged her not to after her last tour. He never understood why she went back, why she couldn't stop. She told him it was duty, but deep down she knew it was something more complicated. This, being here, fighting here, was the only place she ever felt both terrified and alive. Blake's reply was hoarse. "Negative, command. If we don't get help, you'll be writing 12 condolence letters tonight." Steadied her breath. Another target appeared across the ravine and she fired, dropping him. But for every enemy she struck, it felt like 3 more appeared. A kill box. A perfect one. And then something changed. A new sound cracked through the valley. Not the rattling rhythm of assault rifles or the deep roar of machine guns. This was sharp, Singular, controlled, one shot, one silence. Jerked her scope upward, trying to find the source. On the eastern ridge, one of the muzzle flashes winked out. Then another. Each crack came clean, deliberate, final. Whoever it was, they didn't miss. Did anyone see that? Harrison's voice bewildered. Tracked her scope across the ridges. Nothing, just cliffs and shadows. No visual, she answered, her chest tightening. But someone's out there. Another crack. Another hostile dropped. The enemy lines faltered, shouts rising in a language she couldn't place, panicked and sharp. The rhythm of their coordinated fire broke for the first time. Charlie Actual, a new voice cut into the radio net. Calm, controlled, cold. This is Ghost 6. Maintain defensive positions. Allow me to work. Froze, Ghost 6. She'd never heard the call sign. Neither had anyone else. Blake keyed his radio immediately. Identify yourself, unit designation, mission authority. A pause, then the voice again, unflinching. No official unit, just an observer, and I don't like watching Americans die in foreign valleys. Another shot rang out, another enemy silenced. His heart thudded against her ribs. Whoever this was, they weren't just skilled. They were impossible. Every shot hit the right target at the right time. Machine gunners, spotters, commanders shouting orders, all gone in seconds. And yet she couldn't see them. Not a glint of a scope, not the shift of a shadow. Just the cold, precise voice and the sound of bullets ending lives from somewhere above. Blake didn't hesitate. He gave orders to reposition, to shore up their weakest flank, and Ghost 6 covered the movement perfectly, dropping threats before they could exploit the gap. It was as if the sniper could read their minds, see the battle unfolding from a higher plane. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the haunting thought she couldn't shake. Whoever this ghost was, they weren't just saving them. They were controlling the battlefield, shaping it. And what terrified her most was the question that hung in the back of her mind. How long had Ghost been watching? She swallowed hard, her cheek pressed back into the limestone as the radio crackled again. 44 hostiles remaining, Ghost reported, voice steady. They're attempting to flank you southwest. Move 4 men to cover that approach immediately. Blinked, stunned. He wasn't guessing. He was counting. She glanced toward Blake, who was already barking orders to reposition. She obeyed, shifting her angle, her rifle sweeping across the canyon. Every muscle in her body was on edge, but somewhere beneath the fear, something unexpected stirred hope. They weren't alone anymore. Someone was out there, someone deadly, someone on their side. For now, but knew something Blake didn't. She could feel it in her gut, in the sharpness of that unseen voice, in the silence that wrapped around each perfect shot. Ghost 6 wasn't ordinary military, maybe not even current military, and that meant one thing. Whoever they were, they had secrets. And secrets always came with a price. What kind of person could shoot like that? That was the question Foster couldn't silence as she adjusted her scope, her eyes burning from the constant dust and smoke. Whoever Ghost 6 was, they weren't just helping, they were rewriting the battle. Every crack of that unseen rifle shifted the momentum, breaking the enemy's rhythm, dismantling their coordination. But with every perfect shot, unease grew. Precision like that didn't come from training alone, it came from something else, experience, obsession, maybe even a shadow of madness. She pressed her lips together, blocking the thought. She didn't have the luxury of doubt. Not here, not now. The valley shook with another barrage, ducked as shards of stone tore across her cheek, a stinging line of pain. She tasted copper on her tongue. She pressed her hand to her face, blood but shallow. She could live with that. What she couldn't live with was the sound of Harrison shouting for ammo beside her. Last mag, he yelled, desperation threading his voice. Rolled toward him, slid a spare from her vest and shoved it into his palm. Make it count. Her own pouch was nearly empty. She had 4 rounds left in her current magazine, and after that, nothing. The seals were running dry. It was only a matter of time before Ghost Six's precision wouldn't be enough to save them. And still the voice came, calm as stone. "Charlie team, be advised," Ghost said over the net. "Enemy field commanders are attempting a withdrawal north. They're aiming for vehicles concealed beyond the ridge. If they escape, they'll return with reinforcements, heavy weapons." Pulse thudded hard. Reinforcements. They could barely survive this wave. If more came, they wouldn't make it out of the valley. Blake didn't hesitate. "Ghost, can you interdict their route?" "I'm developing a solution." The answer was delivered like a surgeon reporting on a patient's condition, clinical, detached, certain. Then came the shots, fast, calculated, each one finding a commander, each one unraveling the enemy's chain of command. Through her scope, saw panic ripple through their attackers. Fighters shouted, breaking ranks, abandoning cover. Some tried to run, some froze. None of them understood where death was coming from. "Jesus," whispered Davis beside her, "he's not human." Didn't respond. She couldn't, because deep inside she was beginning to agree. No human should be able to see this much, anticipate this perfectly, strike this fast. But Ghost Six wasn't a ghost. He was flesh. Somewhere up there on those cliffs, a pair of eyes was watching, a finger was pulling a trigger, and that meant someone had chosen to be here. Someone who had chosen this hidden valley, chosen this moment, chosen them. Why? She blinked hard, her vision swimming from exhaustion. It didn't matter, not yet. She steadied her rifle, fired her last 3 rounds, each one deliberate, each one dropping a target that threatened to push too close. When the bolt locked back on an empty chamber, her chest clenched. She dropped the weapon, drew her sidearm, and knew in her gut it wouldn't be enough. That was when Ghost spoke again. "Charlie team, significant enemy movement in the western cave system. They're establishing fallback positions with interlocking fire lanes." Squinted, training her scope toward the dark mouths of the cliffside caves. She saw shadows flickering inside, fighters moving crates, setting up tripods. If they secured that ground, it would turn into a slaughter. "Confirmed," Blake said, his jaw tight. "We can't dislodge them from here." "It won't be an issue much longer," Ghost replied. And then it happened. Froze as she watched bullets ricochet off the limestone walls and curve into the cave. Fighters inside fell where they stood, never knowing how the shots had found them. She had never seen anything like it in her life. Her breath caught in her throat. How in God's name is he making those shots?" she whispered. The reply came without hesitation, as if he had heard her even through her whisper. "Advanced ballistics, physics, 25 years of experience." 25 years. His mind stumbled over the words. Whoever Ghost Six was, they weren't young. This wasn't a reckless hotshot pulling stunts. This was someone who had walked battlefields for longer than she had been alive, who carried decades of ghosts on his shoulders. The enemy broke, panic spread like fire. Their ambush dissolved into chaos. From 52 strong, the force was now fewer than a dozen, desperate, cornered, feral. And that was when's chest tightened most, because desperate fighters weren't the weakest. They were the most dangerous. "Charlie actual," Ghost's voice sharpened. "Final assault inbound. They're going frontal, everything they have left." Braced her pistol, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Blake looked down the line of his exhausted men, their faces pale, their eyes hard, every one of them down to scraps of ammunition. "We hold," he said. His voice cracked, but the order was steady. The charge came like a storm. The last of the enemy screamed as they ran, firing blindly, determined to overrun what was left of Team Charlie. Emptied her sidearm, every shot precise, every recoil burning her wrist. She saw Harrison reload with trembling hands, saw Davis drag a wounded man back into cover, saw fire his last burst from the hip like it was his final breath. The wave kept coming, too close, too fast, his pistol locked empty. She dropped it, her fingers fumbling for her combat knife. The thought burned through her chest, this was it. This was where it ended. And then the voice came, urgent, commanding. Charlie team dropped flat now. Didn't think. She hit the ground, pressing her face into the dirt. Around her, every man did the same. The shots that followed were impossible. They threaded through air, stone, flesh, perfect lines that cut down the last attackers mid-charge. Their bodies collapsed mere meters from where lay, her cheek pressed into the earth, her heart rattling like a drum in her chest. Then silence. Complete silence. Lifted her head, her breath trembling. The valley was still. No shouts, no fire, no enemy, just the sound of her pulse and the slow drip of blood from her temple where the stone had cut her earlier. "Sound off," Blake commanded, his voice hoarse. One by one the replies came. Wounded, exhausted, but alive, all of them alive. Closed her eyes for a beat, a raw wave of relief crashing over her. She hadn't believed it was possible. Not 15 minutes ago, she was certain she would die nameless in a valley that didn't exist. Now she was breathing. She was alive, because of him, because of Ghost 6. Blake pressed his radio. "Phantom, this is Charlie Actual, situation secure. What's your status?" "Nothing." Phantom respond. Still silence. Scanned the cliffs desperately, her eyes sweeping every shadow, every jagged ledge. But there was no flash of movement, no silhouette against the sky. Ghost 6 had vanished. Her voice broke as she whispered into the net. He was just here. No one answered. And as the silence stretched, realized something that chilled her more than the ambush itself. Maybe Ghost 6 hadn't come to save them. Maybe he had come to test them. Why did survival feel heavier than death? Foster sat against the jagged wall of the ravine, her breathing ragged, her hands trembling against the dirt. The valley had gone silent, but inside her chest, a storm raged. Relief, yes, but tangled with something darker. The sound of Ghost 6's voice still rang in her ears, as if he hadn't left, as if he were standing right behind her. But the cliffs were empty. "Status," Blake ordered again, his voice flat, almost mechanical. That was how leaders survived moments like this, stripping the emotion from their tone. One by one the men answered, wounded, bruised, bleeding, but alive. Pressed her blood-streaked fingers into the bandage Harrison tied around his thigh. His face was pale, his jaw set against the pain. He gave her a weak grin, and she tried to return it, but her lips felt too heavy. 12 lives, 12 Americans, every one of them breathing because of a man, or was it a ghost they had never seen? Tilted her head back against the stone, staring upward at the ledges where the shots had come from. She narrowed her eyes, searching for any trace. A glint, a shadow, a sign, nothing, just rock and sky. Her chest tightened. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still up there, watching. "Phantom, this is Charlie Actual," Blake called again into the net, forcing calm into his voice. "Radio check, respond." Silence. His pulse quickened. She bit her lip, tasted blood again. "He's gone," she murmured, almost to herself. Blake turned his head toward her, eyes sharp. "You get a visual at any point." She shook her head. Not even a silhouette, but she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. That kind of shooting that doesn't just happen. Whoever he is, he's done this before. A lot. Blake studied her for a beat, then nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. Ghost 6 hadn't been an accident. The next 40 minutes bled into eternity. The team huddled in their defensive positions, waiting for extraction. No one spoke much. Every sound carried weight. The shuffle of boots, the rattle of empty magazines, the faint hiss of wind across the valley floor. Found herself staring at her rifle. The chamber empty, the barrel scorched. It had done its part and she had done hers, but the last kill, the last salvation, that hadn't been hers. And that cut deep. She wasn't jealous, not exactly, but there was a sting she couldn't name. She had trained her whole career for moments like this, to be the sharp eye, the steady hand, the last defense. Yet here she was, alive because someone else had taken the shot, someone she couldn't even thank. Her chest ached with the weight of it. When the finally roared overhead, the sound was thunderous, almost foreign after the suffocating silence. Dust kicked up in swirling clouds as Marines descended, weapons ready, scanning for threats, shielded her face against the rotor wash, blinking grit from her eyes. One of the Marines crouched beside her, his gaze sweeping her blood-streaked cheek. "You good, ma'am?" She nodded, though the word didn't feel true. Good enough. The Marines fanned out, taking in the scene. Their eyes widened at the sight of bodies scattered across the canyon, 52 enemy fighters, each in positions that made no tactical sense, as if death had chosen them one by one, plucking them from cover with invisible hands. Caught the look on one Marine's face. Awe, fear, confusion, the same thing she felt. Blake gave the extraction team a clipped report. The words came clinical, stripped of emotion. Enemy eliminated. No casualties. Mission compromised but team intact. He didn't mention the voice on the net. Watched him carefully. He was holding it back. For the official record, there would be no Ghost 6, no phantom sniper, just 12 SEALs who had fought their way out of hell. And that gnawed at her. As the lifted them from the valley, pressed her forehead to the window, staring down at the cliffs receding below. Her eyes traced the ledges again, searching for movement. She thought she saw something, a flicker, a shadow leaning against stone, but then it was gone, swallowed by distance. Her hand tightened into a fist. She whispered so softly no one could hear, "Why did you help us?" Back at base, the debrief was swift, clinical, cold. Captain listened as Blake delivered his account, his face unreadable. Sat against the wall, her bandaged cheek stinging, her thoughts heavy. When Blake finished, closed the file. "Officially," he said, "Team Charlie completed reconnaissance objectives and defended against enemy forces with 0 casualties. That's the report." His chest burned. She wanted to speak, to shout. That wasn't the truth. That wasn't the whole truth. But she caught Blake's eye across the table. His expression was firm. Warning. "Don't." She swallowed hard, her words dying in her throat. When the meeting ended, lingered in the hallway, her back pressed against the cool wall. Her breath came shallow, her thoughts circling. She could still hear Ghost 6's voice. Calm, steady, absolute. She closed her eyes. The sound wasn't leaving her. That night she sat alone in the barracks, her rifle disassembled across her lap. She cleaned it slowly, methodically, the motions more ritual than necessity. Her hands moved on their own, but her mind wandered. She replayed every shot, every impossible ricochet, every command Ghost had given. How he had known their vulnerabilities, their positions, their weaknesses. How he had counted every hostile. And the one detail that haunted her most, his words. "I was military, different service branch, different theaters, ancient history." Ancient history. Froze, her brush hovering above the barrel. Ancient history didn't sound like retirement. It sounded like exile. She set the weapon down, her pulse racing. Whoever Ghost 6 was, he wasn't just skilled. He wasn't just a savior. He was someone who had walked away from the system and chosen to keep fighting anyway. Her eyes fell shut. Was he a hero? Or something else entirely? Didn't know, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to forget him. Not ever. And some part of her, a part she didn't dare admit, wanted to find him. Because men like Ghost 6 didn't just appear. They left trails. And Foster had never been good at letting go of a trail. Why was silence harder than the gunfire? Foster sat alone in the briefing room long after the others had left. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting pale shadows across the empty table where 12 men had nearly signed their death warrants. She stared at the debrief folder still lying open in front of her. Official language, sanitized, clinical. Words that erased Ghost 6 entirely. She read the lines again, her jaw tightening. Engagement, Hostile force eliminated. Friendly forces intact. Mission compromised, extraction complete. No additional assets involved. It was a lie. Pressed her fingertips into the paper until they trembled. How could they erase him? Without Ghost 6, every one of them would be buried by now, their families receiving folded flags and final words. But in the eyes of command, he didn't exist. Because acknowledging him would mean answering questions they didn't want to face. She closed the file with a sharp snap, the sound echoing in the empty room. For a moment she sat still, listening to the thud of her own pulse in her ears. She thought about speaking up during the debrief. She thought about telling that they owed their lives to a man who had vanished into the cliffs, but Blake's look had stopped her. Don't. And maybe Blake was right. Maybe speaking out would just bury her under suspicion, maybe ruin her career. But the thought of silence, the thought of letting Ghost 6 vanish into myth, it cut deeper than any bullet. Rose from the table, her body stiff from hours of sitting, her cheek throbbing under the bandage. She left the room and walked the quiet corridors of the base, her boots echoing against the floor. Every turn of the hallway carried her back into her own mind. Who was he? Why was he there? And why did his voice still linger in her head, like a memory she couldn't shake? She reached the barracks, but she didn't stop at her bunk. She kept walking until she reached the small operations library, a place rarely visited at this hour. She slipped inside, dimmed the lights, and pulled an atlas of Eastern Europe from the shelf. Her fingers traced the ridges of the valley where they had almost died. The maps showed nothing unusual. Blank terrain, unmarked coordinates, but she knew better. That valley wasn't empty. It wasn't wilderness. It was chosen. She flipped pages, searching for any cross-reference, any note of old Soviet installations, any rumors of training grounds. Nothing. The silence stretched from the maps themselves, as if even paper wanted to erase what had happened there. Her eyes burned. She closed the atlas and sat back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. She had spent years mastering patience, the kind snipers lived on. Hours of waiting, days of stillness, weeks of silence. But this silence, the silence of unanswered questions, was unbearable. The door creaked. Turned, startled. Blake stood in the doorway, his uniform jacket unbuttoned, fatigue etched deep into his face. For a moment, they just looked at each other. "You're not supposed to be here," he said finally, his voice low. "Neither are you," she answered. A ghost of a smile tugged at his mouth, but it didn't last. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His eyes flicked to the atlas on the table. Still chasing shadows. Swallowed, not shadows, a man, someone who saved us. Blake's expression hardened. "Listen, you need to let it go." She rose to her feet, her pulse quickening. "How can you say that? He was real. You heard him. You saw what he did." "I did," Blake admitted. His tone softened, but the steel remained underneath. "And because of him, we're alive. That's enough." "No, it's not." The words broke from her like a crack in stone. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "We owe him more than silence. Don't you wonder who he is? Don't you wonder why he was there?" Blake looked at her for a long moment. His silence was heavier than words. Then he said quietly, "Of course I wonder, but command doesn't want answers. They want clean reports. They want control. And chasing a phantom, that doesn't end well for people like us." His chest tightened. "So you'll just let him disappear?" Blake's eyes dropped, his shoulders heavy. "Sometimes the only way to survive this job is to accept the mysteries you can't solve." She felt anger flare in her chest. Not at Blake, never at him, but at the system, at the indifference, at the coldness of men like who could erase a savior with the stroke of a pen. She clenched her fists. "I can't." Blake's gaze snapped back to hers. "I can't," she repeated, her voice firmer now. "He saved my life. He saved all of us, and I won't let him be erased like he never existed." Silence filled the room again. Blake's jaw tightened. Then, with a weary sigh, he turned and opened the door. "Be careful," he said over his shoulder. "Some ghosts don't want to be found." He left her standing alone with the maps. Sat back down slowly, her heart pounding. She knew Blake was right about the risk. She knew the shadows were dangerous, but something deeper than fear pushed her forward. Because she hadn't just heard Ghost Six's voice, she had felt it, the calm, the authority, the edge of sorrow buried beneath control. That wasn't just a sniper saving lives. That was a man carrying a weight she didn't understand. And she couldn't let it go. Over the next weeks became a shadow herself. In quiet hours between missions, she sifted through fragments, reports of unexplained sniper activity in remote theaters, rumors whispered among operators about guardian fire that appeared in impossible places. Most were dismissed as myths. But myths always had roots. Late one night, she found a detail in an after-action report from Afghanistan 6 years earlier. A Green Beret unit surrounded near Helmand, casualties imminent. And then, silence in the report, followed by a clean victory no one could explain. Leaned closer, her pulse racing. Buried in the margins was a note, unconfirmed Overwatch, not U.S. military. Her hands trembled. She touched the paper like it might vanish. Ghost Six hadn't started with them. He had been there before. Her throat tightened. She whispered to the page, to herself, to the unseen man who had saved her. "Who are you?" But the silence gave no answer. And yet in that silence made her decision. She wasn't going to stop until she knew. Even if it meant following the trail of a ghost. Why did every trail lead to silence? Foster leaned over a dim laptop screen in the corner of the base's intelligence office, the clock on the wall ticking past midnight. The room smelled of coffee gone stale, paper, and dust. She shouldn't have been here, digging through after-action reports outside her clearance, but obsession had long since outweighed rules. The word echoed through her head again: Phantom. Not Ghost Six, not in those reports. The name changed depending on who whispered it. Some called him Ghost, some called him Phantom, some never gave him a name at all, just a story. A sniper who appeared when everything was lost. A voice on the net no one could trace. A guardian who never stayed long enough for thanks. She scrolled through another report. Afghanistan, 2012. A ranger platoon surrounded in valley. No official sniper teams nearby. Yet the Rangers had walked out alive and enemy casualties numbered dozens. A note buried in the margins: unknown Overwatch fire, source undetermined. Rubbed her eyes, exhaustion dragging at her bones. How many times had he been there? How many times had his rifle turned impossible defeats into survival stories whispered over beers, never written into official files? The questions gnawed at her, but another thought cut deeper. Why was he hiding? A soldier like that didn't just vanish. He had to come from somewhere, some unit, some branch, some history. 25 years of experience, he'd said, which meant a career, which meant a record. Unless that record had been buried on purpose. Thoughts snagged on that possibility, sharp and cold. Maybe Phantom wasn't hiding from enemies. Maybe he was hiding from his own. She shut the laptop before her pulse could give her away. The risk was too high. If anyone saw what she was digging into, she'd be finished, discharged, branded reckless. And yet she couldn't stop. The next day in the mess hall, she caught Blake's eyes across the table. He was talking with Davis, but his gaze flicked toward her, catching the restless weight in her expression. Later, as she moved down the corridor, he fell into step beside her. "You're digging," he said quietly. Stiffened, "I'm not." His look told her he didn't buy it. "I told you, some ghosts don't want to be found." "Maybe they need to be," she answered, her voice sharp. "You don't wonder why he's out there, alone, carrying all that." Blake didn't reply immediately. His silence was heavier than denial. Finally, he muttered, "I wonder every damn day. But wonder doesn't change orders, and orders say we close the file." Stopped walking. Maybe you can close it, I can't. For a moment Blake's mask cracked. She saw the same thing in his eyes that she felt in her chest, gratitude tangled with unease. He wanted to know too, he just didn't dare. He walked away, leaving her alone with her determination. That evening tried another angle. She found Harrison outside the barracks, smoking in the fading light. His wounded leg was healing slow, his limp obvious, but he still stood with the same stubborn defiance he always carried. She leaned on the railing beside him. You ever think about him, Phantom? Harrison exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes narrowing. Every night, can't not. You don't forget someone who saves your life like that. Then why aren't you asking questions? He gave a humorless chuckle. Because I'm smart enough to know when questions don't get answers, and if they do, you don't like what you find. Studied him the edge of his profile against the dusk. What if he's not a ghost? What if he's just a man, like us, a man who chose not to stop? Harrison's eyes flicked to hers sharp. Or a man who couldn't stop. You ever think of that? Maybe he's not saving us because he wants to. Maybe he's saving us because he can't do anything else, because he's broken enough that he doesn't know how to quit. The words lodged in his chest like shrapnel. Broken. She thought about the weight in Phantom's voice, the way it carried both precision and sorrow. Maybe Harrison was right. Maybe Phantom wasn't free. Maybe he was trapped by memory, by guilt, by some failure none of them would ever know. Clenched her fists. Then I need to know what broke him. Harrison shook his head, flicking the cigarette to the ground. Careful, Foster. You start digging in graves, you don't always like the bones you find. He walked away, leaving her in the thickening dark. That night dreamed of the valley, not the gunfire, not the blood, but the silence after. The silence where Phantom's voice should have been and wasn't. She woke with her heart pounding, her sheets damp with sweat. By dawn, her decision was solid. If command wouldn't answer, she'd go to the people who whispered. She started small, quiet conversations in bars where operators gathered between deployments, careful questions over whiskey. She never said his name, only hinted. You ever hear about a sniper who shows up when everything's lost? At first most shook their heads. Myths, they said, war stories, bar talk, but some gave looks, subtle, uneasy, and a few muttered just one word. Guardian. Her pulse would spike every time. She leaned closer, pressing gently, and slowly, piece by piece, the fragments built a shape. A Marine unit incornered, saved by fire no one could explain. A British SAS patrol in the Balkans, pinned, until someone started cutting down enemies with impossible range. A French Foreign Legion squad in Mali, claiming they heard an American voice over their net before reinforcements arrived. Every story different, every story the same. Always when hope was gone. Always one rifle. Always vanishing before anyone could see his face. And always a feeling left behind, not just gratitude but unease, as if survival carried a shadow price. Wrote it all down, her notebook filling with scraps of truth. The picture forming wasn't simple. Phantom wasn't just a guardian. He was a ghost trailing through decades, appearing in wars that weren't even his, saving soldiers who didn't even know his name. And the question kept her awake long into the nights. Was he saving them to protect or to atone? The thought wrapped around her ribs, cold and unrelenting. Because if Phantom was atoning, then somewhere in his past, there was a failure so heavy that no number of rescues could ever erase it. Closed the notebook slowly, staring at the pages filled with whispers. She had a new mission now. Not given by command, not in any file. Find the failure. Find the man. Find the truth. Why did every whisper sound like a warning? Foster sat in a rundown tavern on the edge of a NATO base in Romania, the kind of place where walls absorbed more secrets than laughter. The air smelled of stale beer and cigarette smoke, the low murmur of soldiers swapping stories blending into the clink of glasses. She had traveled here on leave, officially to clear her head. Unofficially, she was chasing a ghost. She stirred the whiskey in her glass, waiting. Her notebook lay closed in her pack at her feet, filled with fragments, whispers of a sniper who appeared when hope was lost, who vanished before anyone could know his name. But fragments weren't enough. She needed something solid. And then he walked in. Older, maybe mid-60s. Broad shoulders slumped now with age, but his bearing betrayed a history of command. His jacket was plain, civilian, but his stride was military. He scanned the room once before choosing a seat in the back, facing the door. Old habits. His pulse quickened. She had been told he'd be here. An old SAS officer, retired, who'd once led men in the Balkans. Rumor said his patrol had been saved by someone who wasn't supposed to exist. She finished her drink, steadied her breath, and crossed the room. "Mind if I sit?" The man looked up, his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. He studied her, silent for a long moment. Finally, he gestured to the chair opposite. "You're American," he said. "Sergeant Foster," she replied, sliding into the seat. "Navy, designated marksman." Ah, his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. The one who asks too many questions. Blinked. "How did you?" "Word travels," he interrupted, his voice gravel roughened by age and smoke. "Especially when someone starts digging into phantoms best left buried." Leaned forward, her voice low, steady. "I need to know. He saved my team, he saved me, and nobody will even admit he exists." The man's eyes softened just a fraction. "Then you've already learned the first truth. Officially, he doesn't. Not anymore." His heart kicked, so he was military. "Was," the man confirmed. He sipped his beer, the foam clinging to his beard. "Long ago. Royal Marines first. Then cross-trained with your SEALs. Later, places none of us were supposed to be." Held her breath. She wanted to press, but she waited, patience, let him speak. The man's gaze grew distant, his voice softening. "Balkans, 99, my patrol cornered outside a village. Hostiles had us ringed. We were down to pistols and knives. I was preparing to give the order, the last one." He paused, swallowing. "And then it started, shots from the ridges, clean, perfect, every one of them where it mattered most. Within minutes the valley was silent. We walked out alive, never saw him, only heard his voice, calm, American accent." His chest tightened. She could see it, could feel it, the same way she had felt it in her own valley. "Phantom." The man nodded slowly. "That's what we called him, Phantom, but he wasn't new then. The whispers had already spread." Leaned closer. "Who is he?" The man's eyes darkened. He glanced around the tavern, lowered his voice. "I'll tell you what I know, but you won't like it." Braced herself. His name, his real name, was Elias, Navy Special Warfare, decorated, respected, feared. One of the best snipers your country ever produced. The man's jaw tightened. But he carried a stain, a failure that broke him. His throat went dry. "What failure?" The man hesitated. His eyes met hers, heavy with memory. Helmand Province, 2003, was leading overwatch for a Marine convoy. Insurgents ambushed, had high ground, perfect sight lines. He should have been untouchable. But the convoy was hit hard, too hard. 2 vehicles destroyed, 12 Marines dead. Stomach knotted. Why he didn't stop it. He tried, but something went wrong. No one knows if it was faulty intel, bad positioning, or just fate. All we know is 12 men didn't come home, and he never forgave himself. He disappeared not long after, vanished from rosters. Some say he was discharged quietly. Others say he walked away. But from that day forward, he wasn't a soldier. He was something else. His chest burned. She thought of the challenge coin Phantom had left Blake, 12 stars engraved into the back, 1 for each SEAL he saved. Or 1 for each Marine he couldn't. Her voice shook. "He's atoning." The man's eyes softened. "Aren't we all?" He leaned back, finishing his beer. "Whatever Elias became, he's not saving lives for glory. He's chasing ghosts. Every rescue is penance for the ones he lost, and he'll keep doing it until the weight crushes him. Swallowed hard, her throat thick. She pictured alone in the cliffs, his rifle steady, his voice calm, his heart heavy with 12 names he would never erase. She whispered more to herself than to the man, "That's why he vanished. That's why he hides." The old officer nodded. "And that's why you should let him. Some men deserve their ghosts." But couldn't. She felt it deep in her chest, sharp as the edge of a blade. Elias had saved her life, but now she carried part of his burden. She couldn't let him vanish into legend, not when his story was flesh and blood. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse. The man gave her a long, tired look. "Be careful, Sergeant. If you chase too far, you may find he doesn't want to be found. And worse, he may not forgive you for trying." Left the tavern, the cold night air biting her cheeks. She walked into the darkness, her thoughts heavy. For weeks she had chased whispers. Now she had a name, Elias. And she knew his truth. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't immortal. He was a man carrying 12 shadows. But Foster had never walked away from shadows. And she wasn't about to start now. Why did finding him feel like betrayal? Foster stood in the shadow of the same jagged mountains that had nearly swallowed her alive months earlier. The air here was colder, sharper. It cut through her fatigues into her bones. She had told command she was on extended leave. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. She was following a trail that wasn't meant to be followed. The name haunted her, Elias. Once Navy, once honored, now erased. And yet the man had saved her life. That made him more real than any name in a file. Her search had taken weeks of hushed questions, bribes to informants and favors owed. Each step felt like trespassing on ground no one was meant to walk. But finally, she had a lead. An isolated cabin high in the mountains, where locals swore a weathered American lived alone, a man who kept to himself, a man who carried rifles that didn't belong in any civilian's hands. His boots crunched softly on frost as she hiked the narrow trail, her breath visible in the thin air. Every step felt heavier than the last. This wasn't reconnaissance. This wasn't mission. This was personal. When the cabin came into view, her pulse surged. It was small, rough-hewn timber against stone, smoke curling faint from a chimney. Quiet, ordinary, but the air around it carried weight. She stopped at the tree line, her instincts screaming. This man had spotted her team's helicopter insertion at 4 a.m. months ago. He had read enemy movements as if the earth itself had whispered them to him. Did she really think she could approach his home unseen? Her answer came in the metallic click of a rifle bolt sliding into place. "Froze." A calm, steady voice drifted from the trees to her left. "You've walked a long way, Sergeant Foster, but this is far enough." Her heart slammed against her ribs. Slowly, carefully, she turned her head. He was there, half shadow, half flesh. Elias. Older than she expected, his hair gray, his beard rough, his face lined with years of war and weather. His rifle was steady, trained not quite on her but close enough that she understood the warning. His breath caught. Seeing him was like staring at a living myth. The man who had saved her. The man command refused to admit existed. "You know my name," she said softly. His eyes narrowed. "You've been asking questions, that's dangerous." Lifted her hands slightly, palms open. "I needed to find you." "Why?" His tone carried no anger, only weariness. "I gave you your life, that should been enough." "It wasn't," she answered, her voice firm. "Because I need to know why you're out here, why you saved us, why you hide." For the first time his gaze flickered, just a trace of emotion beneath the calm. He studied her for a long, heavy moment. Finally, he lowered the rifle, though he didn't sling it. "Inside," he said. The cabin was sparse. A wood stove burned low, casting amber light across walls lined with maps, rifles, and journals stacked in uneven piles. Stepped in slowly, her senses taut. moved with the stillness of a man who had lived too long in silence. He set the rifle against the wall and poured 2 cups of black coffee. When he handed one to her, his hand didn't tremble. Steady, even now, always steady. Wrapped her fingers around the cup, the warmth seeping into her palms. "You were Navy," she said, not a question. "Long ago," sat across from her, his eyes fixed on the fire. "But I stopped being a soldier the day 12 men died under my watch." His chest tightened. She had heard the story from the retired officer, but hearing it from his lips was different. He spoke without flourish, without excuse, just fact. "I was their guardian," he continued, his voice low. "High ground, perfect sight lines. It should have been simple, but I missed something. Maybe intel lied. Maybe I wasn't fast enough. Doesn't matter. When the smoke cleared, 12 Marines were gone, 12 families broken." His throat ached. She thought of the challenge coin Blake had shown her. 12 stars engraved into the metal. One for each man had lost. "That's why you saved us," she whispered. His eyes met hers then, sharp, piercing, haunted. "That's why I can't stop." Swallowed hard. She wanted to tell him he wasn't to blame, that war was chaos, that no one man could carry that weight. But she saw it in his eyes. He had already sentenced himself. No words could undo the verdict. "You've been doing this for years," she said. "Afghanistan, Balkans, Mali. You've saved people who never even knew your name." Gave a humorless half-smile. "And yet I couldn't save the 12 who mattered most. That's the balance. That's the ledger I can't close." Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crackle of the stove. Felt the weight of his words pressing into her chest. She knew what it was to carry ghosts. Every soldier did. But ghosts weren't whispers. They were anchors. She leaned forward, her voice trembling despite herself. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry this by yourself." His gaze softened, but only slightly. "You don't understand. This is all I am now. A rifle, a voice, and a shadow on the ridge. If I stop, the ghosts win. If I keep going, maybe, just maybe, I make the world cost a little less for someone else." His eyes burned, but she didn't look away. She had chased him across continents, through silence and whispers for this moment. And now she understood the truth. He wasn't a myth. He wasn't a savior. He was a man punished by his own heart, condemned to keep fighting battles long after the war had left him behind. Still, she couldn't walk away, not now. "You saved me," she said quietly. "That makes your ghosts mine too, whether you want them to be or not." Studied her for a long time. His face, lined with age and sorrow, softened in a way she hadn't expected. For the first time, his voice carried something almost fragile. "Careful, Sergeant. Ghosts have a way of consuming the living." His chest ached. She knew he was warning her off. She knew he was telling her to leave, to let him vanish again into legend. But she also knew something else. She couldn't. Not after this. Not after seeing the man behind the phantom. Why did goodbye feel heavier than death? Foster sat across from Elias in the quiet cabin, the fire crackling low, throwing shadows across his weathered face. Hours had passed in silence, broken only by fragments of conversation, pieces of battles, memories he didn't mean to share but slipped out anyway. Each one left a mark, not just in his voice but in the air itself, heavy, lingering. She had found him, the phantom sniper, the man who had saved her. And yet, sitting here, she realized something she hadn't expected. Finding him didn't ease the weight, it made it heavier. Because now she saw the truth. He wasn't a myth. He wasn't untouchable. He was a man who carried a punishment no court had given, who built his exile one mission at a time. And he had no intention of stopping. "You can't keep doing this forever," she said softly, her voice almost lost to the crackle of the stove. Sipped from his mug, his eyes on the flames. "Forever isn't the point, just until the ledger feels balanced." His chest tightened. "It'll never balance, you know that." His eyes flicked to hers then, sharp, unyielding. "And you know I can't stop trying." Wanted to argue, wanted to tell him the weight he carried wasn't his alone. but her throat closed because she understood. She had felt the same every time she sighted her scope, every time she thought of the ones she couldn't save. She knew how the ghosts stayed, how they whispered in the night. But ghosts weren't whispers. They were a chorus that never stopped. She leaned forward, her voice trembling. "You saved 12 of us. 12. Do you understand what that means? Those families, those lives, you gave them back. Doesn't that matter?" For a heartbeat, his face softened, but then he shook his head slowly. "It matters to them, not to me." Stomach twisted. She realized then that didn't save people for gratitude. He didn't even save them for redemption. He saved them because it was the only way he knew to keep breathing. Silence settled again, thick and suffocating, stared into the fire, her mind racing. She had chased him across continents, through shadows and whispers, needing answers. Now she had them. And still, one question burned in her chest. What happens when you can't save them? His jaw tightened. His hands, steady as stone, flexed once on his knee. His voice came quiet, almost a whisper. "Then I joined them." His breath caught. She looked at him, really looked. At the deep lines in his face, the exhaustion etched into his posture, the way his eyes carried whole wars behind them. He wasn't planning for a future. He was living on borrowed time, waiting for the mission that finally caught up with him. The realization tore at her. She had come here searching for a savior. What she found was a man already halfway gone. "Don't do that," she said, her voice sharp, breaking. "Don't just wait for death. You've given too much already." His gaze held hers, unflinching. "That's where you're wrong, Sergeant. I gave too little when it mattered most. Everything since then, it's just trying to even the score." Shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You don't have to carry this alone." A long pause, then gently he said, "Yes, I do." The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. The sound filled the silence between them. Wiped her cheek, steadying herself. She wanted to keep fighting, to break through the wall he had built around his heart. But deep down, she knew something bitter and true, wasn't asking to be saved. He had chosen his path. And now she had to choose hers. The next morning, the sky over the mountains was pale and cold. Stood outside the cabin, her pack slung over her shoulder, frost crunching under her boots. Stood a few feet away, his rifle slung across his back, his face unreadable. Neither spoke at first. The silence between them was heavier than words. Finally broke it, "You'll disappear again." "Not at once, that's what ghosts do." Her chest ached. "And what am I supposed to do with this, with knowing you're out there carrying all this alone?" He studied her, his eyes softer now, the edge of sorrow glinting beneath the steel. "You do what I never could. You live." Blinked against the sting in her eyes. She wanted to reach for him, to hold on, to refuse to let him vanish. But she didn't. She understood. To follow him too far was to drown in the same ghosts. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you for saving me, for saving us." Gave the faintest nod, then turned toward the tree line. His steps were steady, unhurried, like a man walking into his own shadow. Within moments, the forest swallowed him. Stood there long after he was gone, the wind cold against her face, her heart heavy. She knew she would never see him again. And yet part of her believed he would still be out there, on ridges, in valleys, in places where hope was lost. Watching, waiting, pulling the trigger when no one else could. Weeks later, back at base, placed a small object on her desk. A single spent casing, .338 Magnum. She had found it near the cabin after he left, as if he'd meant for her too. Carved into the brass with the edge of a knife were 4 words. "The only easy day." She closed her eyes, finishing the phrase in her mind. "Was yesterday." Touched the casing with trembling fingers. She didn't know if Elias would ever find peace, but she knew this. Because of him, she and her brothers had lived to see another day. Because of him, families had been spared folded flags. Because of him, she carried not just her ghosts, but his. And maybe that was the point. Not every story ends in redemption. Not every hero walks into the light. Some stay in the shadows, not because they love the fight, but because they can't escape it. Leaned back in her chair, the casing glinting in the dim light. For the first time, she understood what it meant. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.